All right, so we've been talking about positive thinking and talking about how seeing the positive, seeing the opportunity, seeing the mission in every situation reframes that situation for us and really defines our experience of it. We essentially said that you get to choose what your experience should be. You get to choose if your experience should be the positive or the negative. You get to choose if your experience should be the down of whatever's going on or the positivity that we're able to find in it. And that's all great. But it seems that ultimately the facts on the ground stay the same. Everything that we talked about being positive, about seeing the good, about seeing the hand of God and the intent and the mission that God has for us, about looking for the opportunity, even in a difficult situation, that's wonderful. But it seems that the trouble and the challenge remain the same trouble and challenge. And it's all about what's in our head, how we're trying to make the best of it. So it's great to make the best of it and to choose our best reaction and our best attitude, even and maybe especially to a negative situation. But is that good enough? Or, in other words, because optimism and positive thinking doesn't only mean to look for the good in what's in front of us, but an optimist would be someone who expects the good up ahead and hopes and anticipates and remains confident of better results and better times and a better prognosis to come. Well, that's hoping and anticipating and always expecting the best could seem to cause a little trouble. Sometimes people will say you have to be realistic. Don't expect such a good outcome when it's not likely. Because what do you do when there actually is a negative outcome? In other words, because sometimes as optimistic we might be, and as positive as we might try to be, there would still possibly, unfortunately, can be a negative result and a negative bottom line. Well, maybe then our hopes and our extreme optimism isn't doing us any good, and perhaps it's causing some trouble. So it's true that on one hand, it's always to be optimistic. No matter the negative results that come later, and get the great positive good that we hoped for, we still gain for the positivity all along. First of all, that's because we save ourselves a lot of unnecessary trouble. Because sometimes, hopefully many times, hopefully most times, things do turn out good. And if they do turn out good, what use was there to worrying all along? And they say that Churchill said, and I'll try to bring that up here. Churchill is supposed to have said, when I look back at all these worries, I remember the story of the old man who sat on his deathbed that he had a lot of trouble in his life, most of which had never happened. So one obvious benefit of choosing to be optimistic and to expect a good outcome, even if sometimes it doesn't happen, is that sometimes it does happen. So why have all the trouble in a way that doesn't end up happening? Another consideration is that even if God should protect us from such a circumstance, but even if or even when things don't turn out very well, why should we start to suffer early? If there's going to be a problem, if there's going to be a challenge, if there's going to be a not good situation, well, what do we gain by also worrying about it now? What do we gain by paying for it ahead of time with additional stress? This is as The Talmud says, Daya litzara b'shaita. It's bad enough to have the problem when the problem comes. I don't need that problem also now. So again, that would be another benefit to thinking optimistically, to expecting and to expecting good and to staying in that mindset that don't worry, it's going to be okay. Even if it doesn't turn out that way, at least we save ourselves the stress along the way. And that's the kind of thinking behind something like this. And I got to thank one of our participants who actually isn't here right now, who shared this with me a while ago. And this is the kind of argument that people sometimes make, and there's truth to this. Do you have a problem? And if you don't, then don't worry. Yes, of course, it's Jewish to worry, but don't worry if there isn't an actual problem. If you do have a problem and the answer is yes, well, can you do something about it? Well, if you can, yes, then don't worry. Just do what you can do. If you cannot, then also don't worry, because what will you gain? Well, there are some pretty good arguments against worrying and against stressing and against expecting a negative outcome. Because why pile on that extra stress? Why pile on that extra trouble? Especially since hopefully there'll be a good outcome. But nevertheless, all of that said and done, it's still kind of disappointing and essentially concerning that for all our positivity and for all of our positivity bias and our looking at things in the best way possible, we can actually change the facts on the ground, and those facts on the ground might stay negative. They might stay very negative. In fact, this is the reason why in contemporary psychology, there's a discussion against positive thinking. Some professionals, some researchers believe that it feeds into disappointment. People always expect good, stay positive, stay upbeat. They tend to have a crash and a real letdown if it doesn't turn out so good. If people brace for worse, well, then they can handle worse when worse comes. Or when it's not as bad, they actually feel relief. And there are other such arguments which are kind of the reason why some of the real psychologists are not happy with the pop psychology of just be happy, be positive, smile, and pretend that it's okay. But thank God, when we talk about positive thinking and we talk about optimism, we talk about expecting good results, we talk about looking forward to positive, we are going many steps, shall we say, beyond all of that. The Jewish and especially the Hasidic view of thinking positive and staying optimistic is very different than this kind of practical benefits, shall we say, that we talked about till now. Let's look at a letter of the Rebbe, just a short excerpt of a letter of the Rebbe that the Rebbe wrote to somebody who complained and expressed concern about his financial situation. And the Rebbe wrote how he's disappointed with this individual's attitude, with his negative attitude, and how for all their correspondence, he still has not been influenced and inspired to see things more positively. And then the Rebbe makes this point. Here you can actually see the picture of the book of the Rebbe's letters. There are more than 30 of them published by now, 30 such volumes, that is, thousands of letters. And this is the quote that we're going to be reading in the translation in English. It says, even thought has the power to affect actualization. As we see from the teaching of our Rebbes, think good and it will be good. Which is why one should refrain from negative thinking so as not to actualize negativity. So what we think, and how much more so what we say, has an impact, it says, on the actual results, has an impact on the world around us. And this is why the Rebbe's teach, think good and it will be good. Think good and it actually will be good. The reality will follow that thought. The reality, the facts on the ground will respond, as it were, to our positive expectation, to our positive thought, to our good and optimistic. And the Rebbe quoted this a lot and insisted on this, that people be positive and be forward thinking and expect good and not worry and think good, it will be good. In the Yiddish, he used to say, those who remember a little Yiddish, tracht gut wird sein gut. If you think positively, there will be a positive result. And the Rebbe took this, as he indicated in that letter, from the teachings of the Rebbes who preceded him. From the teachings of the previous Rebbes of Lubavitch, the previous Chabad Rebbes, and as we'll see, this goes back much earlier than that. I think it's actually fascinating if we trace this teaching back to its roots. The Rebbe essentially got this idea that thinking positive and thinking optimistically will actually cause a positive result on the ground. The Rebbe got this idea from the previous Rebbe, his father-in-law, who told a story. In 1926, this is published in his talks from that year, 1926, almost 100 years ago, not quite yet. The previous Rebbe told a story of his own great-grandfather, the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe. And the story is that a certain fellow, a follower, a student of the Rebbe, had a son who was seriously, dangerously ill, to the point where he was hovering between life and death. The doctors had given up. In desperation, this father, this individual, traveled to the Rebbe to seek his blessing. Now he left home with his son really, on the brink, not knowing if he would come back and there would be anyone to come back to. And he left home to seek blessing, to seek hope from the Rebbe. And as the story is told, he lived 1,500 vyurst. Vyurst is an old Russian measurement, so that's almost exactly a kilometer. So let's say about 1,500 kilometers, just under 1,000 miles from the town of Lubavitch, where the Rebbe was, where the Tzemach Tzedek was. So he makes this long journey, and by the time he arrives, he doesn't even know if his son is still alive. He comes in to see the third Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, and breaks down into tears, bemoaning his fate, how he's losing his son, and what's going to be. And the Tzemach Tzedek would have none of it. He says, what you got to do is smile, think good, and it will be good. Trach gut wird sein gut. Don't let this pessimism and fear that your son is already gone get to you. Start being more hopeful, more positive, and more optimistic, and that will actually change the circumstance and cause that to be the case. Well, the previous Rebbe said this story, like I said, in 1926. The Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe in the story, the great-grandfather of the previous Rebbe, passed on in 1866, 60 years earlier. So I can't tell you exactly when the story took place, but say some 60, 70 years earlier, with a small child, a young boy. And the previous Rebbe just concluded the story saying, and that child is still alive today. So the father of the boy changed his attitude from concern and pessimism and thinking that by the time he made it to the Rebbe, his son had died, to a hope and optimism and think good, expect and hope good, hope for the good, and that will actually make that be the case. Now, if we continue to trace this idea, the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe, didn't make up this teaching, good and it will be good, but he got it from his own grandfather, who was the first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad. And actually, on the very night, it was a Motzei Shabbos, a Saturday night, when the grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, passed on. So he was in very bad shape. And his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, who had been very close to him, was really feeling down that his grandfather is so unwell and what's going to be. And as he prayed, as he davened the Ma'ariv, the evening service that night, he cried. And he's saying the prayer in a melancholy, depressing tone, expressing his feelings at his grandfather's difficult state. But the Alter Rebbe, the grandfather, heard him and he admonished him. And he says, and this is somewhat of a loose translation of what he told him. He says, your inner state of mind affects reality. Do not sing songs with tunes of depression. The world is like a mirror. When you reflect an image of sadness and dread, this is what comes back to you. The divine energy mirrors your own inner reality. So in other words, the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe, is saying, when we project positivity, we cause divine positivity to be manifest, to be expressed in this world. When we take a positive attitude, when we take a good attitude, we draw this down from God, and actually good should come our way. So don't take this depressed approach to your prayer and cry through it, and this melancholy, depressing song. That's not going to bring any blessing. That's going to elicit and attract, as it were, negativity. This is what some people call law of attraction. Well, from a Hasidic perspective, is actually something real to what we do. So never mind, avoiding thinking negatively, but we should actually be thinking positively in order to draw down that positive energy. We can keep going back with this teaching, because this teaching didn't begin with the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe either. This teaching is found in the Zohar, it's found in the Talmud, and ultimately in the Torah itself. In the very beginning of our history, in the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, and how Moshe became the leader of the Jewish people, how Moshe began his story, his career, as it were, of helping the Jewish people and liberating us from Egypt. And just to recap, as we know, Moses was raised by a unique twist of fate in Pharaoh's household. But as he grew up, the Torah recounts how he went out to see how the Jewish people were doing, under the harsh conditions, under the slavery. And the Torah tells us some incidents that took place. Let's have a look. This is a Talmudic teaching about the same idea. We'll skip that for now. And here we go. Mahi Bayamim Mahi tells us early on in the book of Shemos and Exodus. Now it came to pass in those days that Moses grew up and went out to his brothers and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man of his brothers. So he sees this Egyptian taskmaster beating a Jew who was on the job site. He turned this way and that way, he did a little inspection, and he saw no man. No witnesses. So Moses took action, so he struck the Egyptian, killing him, that is, and hid him in the sand. So that's his first act. He went out to see how the Jewish people were doing. He sees a Jew being beaten by the taskmaster for not doing slave labor well enough or fast enough. And Moshe wouldn't stand by such cruelty. He kills the taskmaster. Well, he went out on the second day, and behold, two Hebrew men were quarreling. And he said to the wicked one, "Why are you going to strike your friend? What's this quarreling all about? It's wicked. Don't do this." And the other fellow, the Jewish fellow fighting with another Jew, retorted, "And who made you a man, a prince, and a judge over us? Do you plan to slay me as you have slain the Egyptian? Are you going to kill me just like you killed the Egyptian the other day? What are you getting involved?" So Moses became frightened and said, "Indeed, the matter has become known. I thought nobody noticed, but people did see that I killed an Egyptian officer, an Egyptian taskmaster. Pharaoh heard of this incident and he sought to slay Moses. So Moses fled from before Pharaoh. He stayed in the land of Midian and he sat down by a well. So Moses goes out again, encounters other people, Jewish people, who tell him, back at him, the incident how he killed the Egyptian. Moses becomes afraid, and what follows is that actually Pharaoh tries to kill him for having killed the officer. But the Rebbe reads this in an interesting way, saying, how did it come to be? Why was it that Pharaoh heard of this incident and sought to slay Moses? Earlier on, he didn't know about it. Nobody knew act, and Moses was safe. All of a sudden, word got out and Moses is in danger. Why did that happen? Because Moses became frightened and said, indeed, the matter has become known. Moses became frightened. He became less confident. He became pessimistic, and that drew down the negative result. Pharaoh did find out, and his life was in danger. If Moses would have been more confident, would have held on to that faith and said it's going to be okay, not become frightened, there would actually not be anything to be frightened about.
So are we saying that because he recognized the peril, he was better if the body had never been found? I'm sorry, I think that's the wrong lesson. If he thought he could get away with it, he would have stayed. The whole tide of history would have changed.
Okay, so God wanted and ultimately that he should run away, and all of the rest of the story should happen. That's an important point. He said we're better off that he did run away and he did marry Tzipporah and he did have the burning bush, and etc., etc. Very good point. But just within this incident right here, we see the progression of how that came to be, that because he was afraid, there was what to be afraid of. And confidence would have brought a better scenario in this specific what to be afraid of. So perhaps in the bigger picture, God is happier that this played out this way. And that's the way it was meant to be. Ultimately, it turns out the way it was meant to be. But by being pessimistic at this juncture, there was a corresponding outcome at this juncture, which again teaches us that if we're positive and optimistic and expect good at each step of the way, that actually draws down good from God. So it turns out that our original premise is incorrect. We started off saying that it's, for all our positivity, the facts on the ground don't change. But we see now, going back all the way to the Torah itself, that the way we approach a situation and the attitude we take and the projection we put out and the optimism or pessimism that we choose to adopt actually has an impact on the results. Now, of course, the question becomes, why should this be this way? How does that make sense? How could it be, and why should it be that God will give us good just because we anticipate good? And God might bring the opposite just because a person is expecting the opposite. How is that even fair or just or correct? And how does that work? So the first thing to keep in mind is something we touched upon earlier in the quote from the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, where he said that the world is like a mirror, and what you project, that's the energy you elicit. In other words, if we understand from a Kabbalistic, from a mystical perspective, that everything in this world is playing out divine energies, a godly source that precedes it, well, in those higher realities, shall we call it, where there is a divine energy behind the story, there's a possibility for a positive energy or a negative energy. And the question becomes, which of those energies, which of those divine expressions will actually come to be in the reality of this world? So there's a lot of potentials out there. There's a lot of possibility. And all that possibility is all possible. It's all available. Which one will come to light? Which one will actually happen? Well, that has a lot to do with the one that we draw down, the one that we pull towards ourselves. So God has put out there multiple possibilities, a better one, a lesser one, maybe something in between. And our attitude connects us to one of those possibilities, draws one of those possibilities down. But we do need to go a step further than this, because often our mindset might be, and perhaps rightfully so, that how can I expect a good outcome? How can I be positive and optimistic? I don't deserve the good outcome. Why would it come my way? Why would God give that to me? Well, here the Rebbe goes on to explain that the very act of that faith and trust in God, expecting good from God in every circumstance, it's that very act that makes us worthy of it. To explain, for a person to really be positive and optimistic, and really expect good results, and expect a good outcome, and trust that God will bring the good that needs to come, even when the circumstance and all the indications and all the odds seem the opposite. Even when it seems to require a miracle, we should still expect the good. That's not a natural way to think, not a natural way to feel. It's not our instinctive attitude. It's an attitude we need to inculcate in ourselves. We need to teach ourselves to adopt. And really, we need to rise above our natural fear and our natural pessimism and our natural concern in order to take that attitude. In other words, it's an attitude which requires rising above ourselves, transcending our own nature, leaving our own comfort zone and what comes instinctively to us, and stepping to something greater and beyond that. But when God sees us making that effort, when God sees us taking that extra step out of our instinctive attitude and teaching ourselves to be positive and have faith and trust that God will bring the good, when God sees us making that big step forward, he does the same. He also leaves the natural, the regular, and the normal. The natural order might be that someone doesn't deserve the good outcome. The natural order might be that in such circumstances, a negative result will inevitably come to be. But God, seeing us leave our own comfort zones and our own natural position, also leaves the natural position, the natural flow of things, and grants us the good from a place and in a measure that is beyond that natural form. So we should always try to think of the good, to expect the good, to be optimistic, to be forward-looking, because that not only helps us live better, but it actually makes it happen. And before I show the video of a closing story that really expresses this very beautifully and powerfully from the Rebbe, any questions or comments?
Yes, I have something, Rabbi. Isn't Jewish prayer similar, that you see the result of what you want before it's attained, so that you're looking at a positive outcome as if it already occurred in your praying?
Well, that's an interesting way to put it, and that would fit nicely with what we're discussing. That when you pray for that positive outcome, but you don't just pray, but you look at it as a new reality that's going to be.
As it happened.
Sorry?
In other words, it's already happened while you're praying. In other words, what you're praying has happened already.
I'm trying to think of, a text that might make that point. There's some places where we say that when we pray, we should be as confident and as trusting in God, what we call bitochon in God, so much so as if it already came to be.
Correct.
So obviously it didn't happen yet, which is why we're praying for it. But our attitude and our comfort and our positivity is as if the good already came to be. We are not concerned at all. We are in a good and positive state, just as if we were already given the good result, even
Right.
though we're still praying for it. I guess that's what you're referring to.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
well said. And yes, Seymour.
But there's also an expression, pray for the best and cope with the rest.
Look, we have responsibilities in this world. We do need to cope with the rest, like you say. We can't abdicate our responsibilities, our obligations towards the circumstances around us. So yes, what comes our way, we need to do our best to cope with, and we trust that God gives us the abilities to. But as we pray for the best, we also remain hopeful and even optimistic that better and the best will come, even if meanwhile we're still coping with all the rest. So I'm going to show this little clip of a fellow telling a story that happened to him himself, where the Rebbe taught him to think positive with amazing results. And let's switch the share. Sorry, coming right up.
Rabbi Avraham Rottenberg is an educator living in Israel. In 1957, while en route to Israel from Brazil, he stopped in New York for an audience with the Rebbe.
נכנסתי לפנת בוקר, ונראה אחרון בתור ככה, כי לא הייתה לי, נכנסתי ודיברתי המון זמן עם הרבי, ברזיל, ועל חינוך וכולו, והוא המליץ, אמרתי כך, אמרתי שאולי כדאי שנשאר פה קצת, שנהיה מורה פה, מה חסרים פה מורים, שם יותר חסרים מורים, אבל אמרתי, יש מי שיוודא את מקומי שם, וקיבלתי משרה בניו יורק, ונשארתי שם שנתיים. כל שנה, לקראת סוף השנה, אני לקחתי את כל הכיתה ונכנסתי לרבי. כל הכיתה, והוא נתן שיחה בפניהם, כן, כל שנה ככה, משהו מיוחד. יום אחד אני מקבל מכתב מהבית, אחי, כותב מכתב, אני זוכר יום חמישי בערב, כותב מכתב, אומר, שאבא קיבל התקפת לב, הוא במצב אנוש. עכשיו המכתב הזה יצא, נגיד ביום ראשון, ואני קיבלתי אותו ביום חמישי. היום קשה להבין את זה, איך לא מטלפנים, איך אני לא יודע מה, איך לא שולחים מברק, שום דבר לא, כתבו ככה. עכשיו אני מקבל מכתב כזה, מה אני צריך לחשוב? ומה, כן, אז אני הכנסתי מכתב לרבי, שאחי כתב כך וכך, וכותב שמצב אנוש, וכתבתי, כבר אינני יודע מה לחשוב. כך כתב שם. אז הרבי לקח את המכתב הזה, עשה קו מתחת למילים האלה, כבר אינני יודע מה לחשוב, הוא כותב, ולפלא, 3 סימני קריאה ככה, אתה רואה את העוצמה שבזה ככה, ולפלא, שהרי ידוע בכגון דע, ציווי נישאינו רבותינו, טראחגות וזנגות, ואחכה לבשורות טובות. טוב, קיבלתי את המכתב הזה, ידעתי שם שאני חי, זה יום חמישי בלילה. עובר את השבת, ביום ראשון עזרתי אומץ וטלפנתי הביתה. סך הכל היה לי טלפון ובבית היה טלפון. ואז כל כך היה נדיר לטלפן מאיפה לים, מי עושה דברים כאלה? היום מטלפנים 10 פעמים ביום. אבל אז זה כאלה, טוב, אז אמא שלי מרימה את הטלפון, שאלתי אותה מה שלום אבא, יצא מכלל סכנה. יצא מכלל סכנה, שאלתי אותה מתי, היא אומרת לי ביום חמישי. יום חמישי. טוב. יפה, טוב. עברתי את הכביש והלכתי במנחה שם ואמרתי שהרבי יוצא ממנחה. נו, יורדתם סטויבס פמיר? שאל אותי. אמרתי לו, כן. עכשיו דיברתי בטלפון, יצא מכלל סכנה. אז הוא שואל אותי מתי? אמרתי לו ביום חמישי בערב. כן? יום חמישי בערב. הוא אומר לי, wenn hat ihr umgehoben zu trachten gut? מתי אתה התחלת לחשוב טוב? ואמרתי לו, מתי אתה התחלת לחשוב טוב? אמרתי לו, מתי שהרבי אמר, מתי זה היה? מתי זה? אני אמרתי לו, אדוני שלי בנחת, ביום חמישי בלילה זה היה. אתה קולט מה אתה מבין, הוא לא בעסק, אז אתה אשם, אתה, כן. Soll sich noch einmal nicht treffen, solche Sachen, sollt wissen, alle mal zu trachten gut. שיותר לא יקרו מקרים כאלה, אבל שתדעו תמיד לחשוב טוב.
So here we have the Rebbe actually stressing, when did you start thinking positively? Don't you see that the turnaround came together at the very moment when you changed your attitude and started thinking positively? So as the Rebbe concluded, let's never have a difficult situation again. But regardless of the situations, we should always think positively, always be optimistic and expect good. Trach good, think good, and vet sein good, the good will come to pass. We do have, of course, the next and final class in this Positivity Bias series next Monday. Before that, we will have the women's class on Wednesday and the Pirkei Avos, the life wisdom from the Talmud class on Thursday, as usual. So please do join us, same time, same virtual place or places, whether you're with us here on Zoom or on Facebook or on YouTube. Any other comments before we conclude?
Rabbi, how realistic is it to change your whole attitude? Doesn't it take a lot of practice and discipline and really concentration to change maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years of thinking negatively? As an example, I'm just asking that question. I mean, you make it sound so simplistic, but I think it's a very difficult thing to change one's attitude that they've had since they've been a child, whether they're 20 years old, 30 years old, 50 years old, whatever. It's not that easy in my experience.
Well, I would agree with you. It's actually very difficult. And that's part of why we have to keep having these classes and keep discussing it and helping each other work on it. But the one of the points the Rebbe made, we quoted along the way, was that God rewards that effort. It takes a lot of effort, and it's actually doesn't come natural to think so positively. But when we do, God rewards that effort with a better outcome. So yes, it might be very difficult, but we have to try our best. And Seymour, I'm sorry.
It is not a binary choice to either be positive or be negative. There are gradations which are subtle and are part of everybody's life. So yes, it takes, and God forbid, families who have had problem after problem or problem that all went the wrong way, it's very difficult to develop or maintain this positive attitude. You can't live in a cloud and think, well, everything's going to turn out right as long as I keep thinking about it.
Well, yeah. So, as you say very well, it's not black and white, there's a lot of shades in between, and we have to keep trying to be a little more positive, and hopefully see the blessing that that can bring. It's sometimes very difficult, as you say. Reality has its way of being an aggressive teacher and teaching that things can be pretty bitter. But the more we try to adopt as much positivity as we can, the more hopefully we bring in a little more positivity at a time. All right, so then I'm going to wish everyone
you.
good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Let's have a great week.
Bye-bye.
And I'm still available if you want to contact me in any way, shape, or form with further questions or comments. If you'd like to disagree privately, you can do that too. Meanwhile, let's all have a good night.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good night.
Nice.
Good night.
Good night.